Did she do it last year?
What's that?
Did she do it?
No, she's going to do it. I think they're
Okay.
delaying just to make sure that.
They're trading out the discs. We're moving up. Okay. They have about another 25, 30 minutes.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming out on Sunday to talk with the Cuyahoga County Board of Elections members and myself as we're preparing for a historic election here in Cuyahoga County. It's historic for a couple reasons. First of all, because this is the 2008 presidential primary election, and because from many points of view, we never thought that Ohio's vote in the primary election was really going to matter like it generally does in the November election. But we know that for perhaps both parties, Democrat and Republican, this may be the deciding moment for who has enough delegates to be able to proceed to the nomination for their respective political party. But it's also historic for Cuyahoga County because an extraordinary effort has been made by this board and its employees and the community in Cuyahoga County to move toward greater election integrity. As you may know, this board has been completely reconstituted, and then in December, it was very difficult for the board members to wade through the difficulties they'd experienced with their previous voting system and move to an entirely different system, different manufacturer, and to do so in well under 3 months. I want to tell you that I have toured the warehouse today. I have seen the layout, the setup, the operations of the board and its employees, and I am very impressed with what I have seen. I know many of the employees here have been working 7 days a week straight without a break. They still work with a very cheerful attitude. They're very hopeful that for the first time in many years that what not only Ohio and this community but the nation will see coming from Cuyahoga County is an election that is without question. I have seen the processes and heard them describe how every step of the way there is documentation and there is the ability to look back at any step of the process and determine who handled what on what piece of equipment at what point in time, so that if we need to go back and look at a particular process, that we will be able to do that and we will be able to understand what has occurred in getting us to the point where people vote their ballots, to the point where they're actually tabulated, and then beyond there for the official results, which will then be transmitted to the Secretary of State, both unofficial and official, so that we do have what the vote is from Cuyahoga County. Statewide, and I'm just going to touch on this briefly because this is one county, although a very important county in the 88 counties in Ohio. We have been preparing with, from day one, with enhanced communication with our boards of elections. We have directives that cover a variety of areas and steps in the processes, as well as almost instantaneous communication with our boards of elections, and the ability for them to ask questions, get answers from staff who are well-versed in election law and election background, and who are assigned specifically to this particular board and the other boards in the state. We have worked on the passage of legislation specifically for Cuyahoga County to allow the midday pickup of ballots to facilitate the more timely tabulation of election results. With the assistance of the Republican-controlled legislature in a very good, worthy bipartisan effort, Governor Strickland signed that legislation Wednesday, the 27th, which will allow this county to utilize midday pickup as they see fit to facilitate more smooth implementation of this new system. In the Everest project, which you may be familiar with, which was a voting machine study of essentially the performance, the security, the configuration management around the state, and internal operations and procedures of our voting systems throughout the state of Ohio. We worked with a bipartisan team of election officials, and we were able to actually understand some of the difficulties that Cuyahoga County faced in last November's election when their premier elections system server, for lack of a better word, the program crashed twice during the counting or the tabulating of ballots with a 15% turnout. We learned that the software in that system is actually problematic in that it's unstable without certain buffers for excess code in a certain amount of space. And actually what we experience in Cuyahoga County can be explained by the source code analysis that our security experts from various universities performed in their analysis of the source code. So we made the difficult decision, and I say we because while it was a tie vote of the Board of Elections and I broke that tie vote, it still took the vote of 2 of the members and the cooperation of all 4 of the members to make this transition to a paper ballot system that for this election will be centrally scanned here at the warehouse of the Cuyahoga County Board of Elections. We have available to the board, in addition to Assistant Secretary of State Chris Nance, who will be here through Election Day, also the assistance of regional liaisons and a director of our Cleveland office who formerly worked here at the Board of Elections, who's also an attorney, plus legal counsel that's assigned specifically to this county. And we have every confidence that even for anything unexpected that occurs in the process, we will be prepared and able to handle this. Our Voting Rights Institute is something that's new in the Secretary of State's office. The boards of elections were provided with 4 million business cards that simply provide a voter with access to our toll-free number and to our website, so that if a voter has a particular problem in the election, rather than to inundate their Board of Elections, or if they feel more comfortable talking to the Secretary of State's office, we will have staff who will be able to deal with their issues and direct them, if need be, to someone who can help them on Election Day. Our reason for doing that is to ease some of the burden on the boards of elections around the state, and especially on this county, for difficulties that voters may experience. And it also allows us to collect data to understand where we can improve in elections and what we also may be doing correctly. So we've got this Tell Us About Your Voting Experience, and our poll workers have been trained to know that this is something that they can provide to a voter if there's a particular issue. Our overseas military and absentee voters have been given access through the Overseas Vote Foundation and a partnership we have with them, funded by the Pew Charitable Trust, to online services that has allowed them to download voter registration and absentee ballot applications that are specific to Ohio that should alleviate errors and mistakes so that we improve the rate of counting of those ballots. Up to this time, the Federal Voting Assistance Program provided a very large manual that a voter had to wade through and try to find their Ohio requirements if they were last from Ohio. And so many times what that resulted in were errors that resulted in their ballots not being able to be counted, because they would have to do it over again and couldn't get it back to us in time. As you may know, there is a 10-day period after the election where military overseas and overseas absentee voters will be able to have their ballots counted as long as they are postmarked by Election Day. If they come in within that 10-day period after the election, they are counted during that period of time. We're also dealing with provisional ballots and determining which of those ballots are eligible to be counted. We have worked with clarifying the voter identification requirements so that we can minimize the number of provisional ballots, which would therefore increase the number of regular ballots and ballots which will definitely be counted. We have worked with ADA compliance, Americans with Disabilities Act compliance with our boards of elections. All of our regional liaisons are equipped with equipment, training. We provided training to the boards of elections to improve the accessibility of polling places. And we have also made improvements in our statewide voter registration database so that voters know when they go to our database, they have a better idea of being able to get through that database and find where it is that they are supposed to vote. Again, our database is only as good as the information we get from our boards of elections, but we've held specific periodic meetings with our boards and with our voting database vendors to clarify that. The other thing that we've done this election is to develop an online poll worker training program, which at least 35 counties are utilizing, which augments existing poll worker training and moves us toward the goal of making more uniform poll worker training throughout the state by the type of equipment and machine. You'll find on the Secretary of State's website that we've revamped our election night reporting system. And in the past, that website was actually operated off-site and hosted on a server, not in the Secretary of State's office. That will change, and we have created an election night reporting system that will sustain 60 million hits in a very short period of time, knowing that in 2004, in I believe a 2-hour period of time, there were 42 million hits in November of 2004. And you'll be able to access a map county by county, and you'll also be able to put in a particular candidate's race where the candidate is actually reported to the Secretary of State. So that would be congressional level on up to presidential. Local candidates, you'll work with your Cuyahoga County website, but you'll be able to actually access through the candidate's name how to learn what those results are. We've been working with the Attorney General's office, and Attorney General Mark Dan has created an Election Day task force. And there are 25 election attorneys that will be posted in Columbus and throughout the state. Some will be there to assist our office if there are problems in any of the counties around the state where we may have to go to court to try to keep polling places open, or where we may need to issue directives that would help us assist boards of elections in the event of machine failure in knowing how to close down a polling location or how to actually tabulate the votes. Unfortunately, we had a dry run with that scenario in Putnam County in 2007. And from going through that experience and personally my being at the office until 6:45 Wednesday morning until we got those votes in, we realized we need to have extra legal staff so that we can assist the boards through that process, ensure accountability, documentation, and integrity of the election process. We also know that there's the potential for Election Day lawsuits filed by one or another of the campaigns. So there will be attorneys actually stationed in the major cities in the state so that if there's litigation filed, the Attorney General's office will be there, able to deal with it instantaneously. The Attorney General's office has assisted us as well in beginning to examine electronic voting machines and other issues that deal with elections so that they are familiar with the operation of these machines. So if there is any allegation of wrongdoing, they're in a position to be able to investigate this for us. As you may know, House Bill 3 empowered the Attorney General to investigate election irregularities and election fraud, in addition to the county prosecutors. With the impact of the voting machine study that we undertook last year, we have been able to gain valuable information that is assisting us in making transitions that we would like to make in the state of Ohio. Cuyahoga County has made that transition much sooner than many other areas of the state, although I will point out that 3 other counties besides Cuyahoga have converted from DRE to optical scan paper ballots prior to the March primary since December, and that includes Putnam County, which is using precinct-based optical scanners. They lost all of their voting machines in a flood last year, and they borrowed machines from Franklin County, ES&S DRE machines, in which they used substandard memory cards, which they purchased from an online supplier, and that's why their machines failed intermittently. But also, the Wirt and Mercer counties converted to Central Count Optical Scan, just as Cuyahoga did. With what we've learned in the Everest project, we have instituted such things as a directive that imposes a chain of custody documentation for all the counties for their voting machines, for their ballots. Cuyahoga already had a chain of custody procedure in place. We were delighted that there were quite a few counties that already had those in place, and what we did in those cases was to simply take a look at their system, approve that, rather than to make them change to the exact form that we used. And as you may know, around the state, counties still using DRE machines, we have required that they utilize and have available backup paper ballots for any voter who asks for that. But it's not just for the issue of security or whether the voter feels more comfortable, but also because it really is a best practice if there's the issue of long lines to use a finite number of machines and take a certain amount of time to vote no matter what, or if there's machine failure. This county, as well as many other counties, has a ballot on demand system, which is a database of ballots that can be printed at the request of a voter according to where that voter's location is, what their precinct is, and what the correct ballot for their precinct would be. But as we've seen in Putnam County, which is just a county of about 40,000 voters, that when those are printed very quickly, there is cause for issues with the scanning of those ballots. And those are, again, something in the case of an emergency. And we believe that the backup paper ballots will provide our counties with some of the security that they need and voters with the security that they need. At this point, I would like to go ahead and open this up to questions. I'm very pleased that Assistant Secretary of State Chris Nance is here with me today, as well as Rob Frost and Sandy McNair, and Ina Jo David Chappelle, Jeff Hastings, and Deputy Director Pat McDonald and Director Jane Platten, who have been doing yeoman's jobs in preparing this county for what I believe will be a very successful election.
Ma'am, you sound very confident. Did the test failures on Friday with scanners affect your confidence in the ability to conduct the election here?
What I have said in the past is that the one thing that we have probably less control over than anything else is the operation, is how the equipment actually performs. This director and deputy director have fantastic strengths in project management. They have the ability to take an entire process and break it into small parts, understand cause and effect, the flow of events, convey that to all levels of staff, and help staff to understand how one moving part affects another. By moving to this type of a system, we've created, as it were, less moving parts, so it should simplify things for poll workers, especially with the volume of registered voters in this county and the expected turnout. The one thing that is more difficult, that is less able to be controlled, is the actual performance of the equipment. We knew, and I knew when I made the decision to vote with moving to this paper ballot system, that as a result of our study, not even this system is what we would call optimum from a performance or security standpoint, but this is a system where we felt that we were better able to manage the risks. And we've received, from everything I can tell, exceptional support from the vendor. As soon as the vendor got the call that one of the machines, which had been tested and tested prior to this point, had failed, they were in the car with 2 new machines from Omaha, Nebraska, driving them over here. You will see a public test of these 2 machines at 6 o'clock today. We are confident that they will perform as intended, and that does not diminish my confidence. This is the one area where I knew that we had probably less control than any other aspect of the process.
Yet the decision was made based on the new platform, which was the equipment itself. Having just a limited amount of time before the actual primary, are you confident that this system will perform much better than what we've seen here in Cuyahoga County?
I am confident. When we looked at the results of the voting machine study, we did a top-to-bottom review of every voting system used in the state of Ohio. No other voting system could be used unless it is actually tested and certified. And no other better equipment was available because it has been held up in the federal testing and certification process. Essentially, the states are hamstrung by the process at the federal level. The equipment that we have available to us in the states at this point in time was rushed through because of Congress's eagerness to get the Help America Vote Act implemented before the 2004 election, which for the country would be like trying to turn the Queen Mary, to move us from essentially punch card voting systems to these electronic voting systems. As a result, the testing of this equipment was done privately by the National Association of State Election Directors, who were funded in part by the voting machine manufacturers. The security testing that we did in Ohio, and our test has been called by some the most exhaustive test in the nation, was not performed as part of the testing process federally. Then the equipment came to Ohio, and our Board of Voting Machine Examiners at the time tested and certified that. And even the Diebold system, which Cuyahoga had chosen prior to this, was actually required to use an additional program called Digital Guardian, which no other state utilized, which was to actually improve the integrity of the process. And even that was deemed to be substandard by our experts. So we are, to some degree, to a great degree, hamstrung by the situation in which we find ourselves because of federal regulation.
Secretary Brunner, what, if anything, are you doing to ensure that there is second chance voting here in Cuyahoga and in Mercer and in Van Wert counties where there are no precinct scanners available?
We have worked with those counties in providing a directive on what is needed in terms of documentation to accompany each ballot when a person is given an individual ballot. And I personally went over that, made sure that it was extremely bold, that they understood that issue. I know Jane has told me anecdotally that an absentee voter actually called in here who received that kind of information with their ballot and said, do you really think we're that dumb? We can't figure this out. And so that's somewhat heartening to me. The other thing is when you look at the Florida 2004, what they call butterfly ballot, it was very confusing when you looked at the pictures because on our ballots, the ovals are on the left-hand side. And on these butterfly ballots, the ovals were down the center and they were intermittent like this. And so it became confusing to know which line the oval actually belonged to. And we do not have ballot styles of that type in Ohio. So we just issued a directive on the unofficial count. It's 2008-31, and you will find it on our website. And we took extra care to talk about the overvote situation so that, for instance, even though a machine may kick out a ballot for an overvote, it still is incumbent upon the board to determine voter intent. And voter intent goes to whether that person meant to overvote a ballot, because they could have an erasure or they could circle that second vote and say, disregard this one or put an X through it, and it's incumbent on the board to do that. We've even taken it to the point where if a person does what we call a double bubble vote, and you hear it referred to differently in California, but what it really means is that the person votes for a printed candidate's name, and then they go down to the section where you can write in, and to write in that vote, you have to color in the oval again and write in the candidate's name. If they write in the same candidate's name that they voted for, that is not an overvote, and the vote is to be counted. So we've taken extra precautions on overvotes to really instruct the board, so we take a lot of political discretion out of the process, which is what happened in Florida in 2004.
So let's say a senior shows up at one of your precinct places, is somewhat unsure, even with all of the things that you have mentioned. What, if anything, is going to be done to help that voter who may be unsure as to whether or not they have filled out that ballot properly there? Is there something that will show them, here's the correct way to fill out your ballot? Is there someone that's going to be there to say, do you need some help? Do you want us to look things over to make sure you filled out things properly? What's being done to sort of safeguard to make sure?
Can't do that.
Okay, well then what can be done? At the precincts, what can you do to ensure that?
There's information that warns the voter about it. The ballot itself tells them how many they're allowed to vote for that particular race. And so the design of the ballot, the educational information is there, and there's been public education that's been done by the Board of Elections regarding overvotes. We will be actually tracking overvotes in the unofficial count as well as the official count. And we will be looking with great interest to see if, for instance, there is a lesser degree of overvotes in, for instance, Summit County, which has the precinct-based optical scanners, as opposed to Cuyahoga County, which doesn't. It's important that I emphasize that when the decision was made, it was a lesser of two evils kind of decision. And ideally, what we wanted to do was to move to precinct-based optical scan, but to do that would have created more chaos than to do it this way as an interim step.
But the law requires, does it not, that there be an opportunity for second chance voting?
The law requires under the Help America Vote Act that the law permits ballots to be centrally scanned. And in that instance, the law requires that voter education be performed by the Board of Elections, which this board has done. Next question.
I want to ask about the TSX machines that are now in storage. Those TSX machines went into storage with your decision here in Cuyahoga County to break that tie. We don't have any assurity at this point that we can even get our money back on those machines. Should we? I don't see any move to bring them back. the TSX machines at 22 million roughly, I'm also told locally, did not carry a warranty. Diebold tells me there is a warranty. Do you know if there is a warranty in existence for what we were sold just a few years ago?
When we went into office, first of all, let me explain that there were some statewide contracts that were negotiated. Those were not in existence, at least copies of those, in our office. And in order for us to conduct our voting machine study, to understand what the Secretary of State's rights were to have access to the source code, to have it analyzed by a third party, we actually had to go to the voting machine manufacturers to get copies of those contracts. We were told anecdotally that there was constant shredding of documents that went on. And personally, when I was in the office on December 1st of 2006, I saw a trash can as high as my shoulder that was full of shredded documents. But at any rate, we only know what's in the contract. And then again, there were separate contracts issued when the counties selected that equipment and purchased that. And so that would be in the contract, either the state contract or the Cuyahoga County contract.
With all due respect, what I'm saying is at this point it's pretty clear that the TSX machines from Diebold Premier Election System did not work as we wanted them to. And I've heard your interview even with Dan Rathern explaining the extended circumstances surrounding that. What I'm coming back to is that these machines simply didn't work. The company claims that they did offer them with a warranty, claiming that they would work as planned. And what I'm hearing from the state and from the county is we don't even have the paperwork to go back and say, you know, it didn't work as planned, and can we get our money back?
Part of what I'm looking at is this county has actually initiated a lease with the option to purchase for the equipment that it has. That doesn't mean that it's going to use this precise equipment in the November election. I have been staying in contact with the voting machine manufacturers to learn about their new systems so that we can get those before the Board of Voting Machine Examiners for testing to see if it's possible that they be made available to the counties before the November election in time to implement. My thinking with that is in negotiating the contracts to take into account the failures of the prior systems, to look for some sort of recompense in negotiating whatever contract prices we're able to for subsequent machines.
Does that mean we might go back to Diebold?
That would be up to the board. But I can tell you that both ES&S and Diebold, and even a company called Dominion, who is out of Canada but operates in the UK and Canada, from what I understand, is in the federal pipeline right now with new optical scan equipment, new servers, and software, and is anxiously trying to get through that process to bring them to Ohio for testing and certification.
At this point, the county has spent $3 million to get it prepared for this election, and we're going to have to get more money together for the next, from the primary to the actual election in November, which is, we're looking at maybe $14.5 million. Where's that money going to come from?
This county has been very fortunate in the ability to make the transition now, and that their county commissioners were willing to step up and take responsibility for funding this. Once we get through Tuesday's primary, I will be turning back to the legislature, and we're going to look at what happens in this primary, how the equipment operates, but I am asking the legislature to fund a statewide conversion to optical scan paper ballots. And again, the question is whether the legislature has the political will to move forward in this direction. I know that funding is difficult in Ohio, but the purchase of equipment in the past has been through capital dollars, not through general revenue funding, and I believe that if the political will is there, they will find the money to do this.
Has anybody been in contact with former Secretary Blackwell about the missing paperwork?
The only contact I know is John Conyers' committee in the House is subpoenaing him in to testify about voter disenfranchisement. But we're still trying to get bonus money back from Ken Blackwell's people.
I would guess that you're fairly concerned about everything that has happened, including missing paperwork.
Well, we've obviously been concerned. Otherwise, you might have seen me traveling around the state a lot more. But we essentially had to perform triage when we came into the office to ensure that we could get the state in a position where we were ready to successfully undertake 2008 presidential primary election. We were really hoping that we would be under the radar, as it were. But as we find ourselves so often in Ohio, we're smack dab in the middle.
Ma'am, here's a radar question. When America wakes up Wednesday morning, will we know who won the presidential primaries in Ohio?
I believe that we'll have a good idea. I have some counties with DRE as their primary system who are concerned about the additional paper ballots, the amount of time that will take. I think they'll find that it may take a little bit more time, but because they're the same type of ballots as their absentee ballots, it simply is going to add an additional layer of counting to what in the process is absentee voting, counting those, and then going to the electronic votes, and then adding one more step of scanning the paper ballots. And I think that we may have our results a little bit later, and I'm not even going to try to predict when we're going to have a good sense of where Ohio is. But the one thing I know about election officials is that they have been through this process time and time again. And whatever happens, an election always occurs. And no matter what situation they're given, they are people of great ingenuity. They can turn on a dime, and they will make it work no matter what. Thank you, everyone. You want to talk about they're hopeful, they're optimistic, and then knowing Jane's extraordinary to manage a project, and Pat as well. So they have laid out a process.
The story tomorrow on the cost. The hiccup that happened on Friday was concerning.
I think we're through that. I mean, that was the one thing I knew that we were kind of at the mercy of the manufacturers about. It's like in my office, you know, we can control processes and people and
Do everything on paper, right?
Right. But you know, I manage information in my office. When the server crashes, it crashes. I mean, you know, we could get a corrupt email in that, you know, causes a problem in our system, and then we just have to count on our people being able to go in there, fix it, and make it right.
Fair to say we haven't landed on the correct one yet. I mean, we're on
we're
evolving.
I think we're evolving, but what my concern was to make the change for March was I knew this county needed to move to paper ballots, and assuming we can move to the precinct-based optical scanners, at least folks will be used to the paper ballots before we get to November.
Well, we did a good amount of this about the education of what you do. Thank you for your time.
Thank you
It's a
very
pleasure.
much. It's a pleasure.
Really.
Likewise, yeah.
The official candy wearing.
Thank you very much. That's great. Thank you.
Through an RSS feed from our website to be able to post the information. And I
Okay.
don't know that they're going to post all results, but I think they're going to definitely want to do the presidential candidates.
Okay.
And ones that are like statewide. I mean, the Supreme Court races they're not going to post public because they're running. There's no opponents really. I mean, for the most part.
Right.
But they may post in any races that were like a primary race where there were two candidates running for a party. Yeah. So,
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, and could you just say on the record that you're putting the results reporting into your office?
They're going to
Secretary of-
link through.
They're-
What they'll do is connect to our website through an RSS feed, which anyone is able to do. All media sources, you sign up for the RSS feed.
Okay.
What this group will do is then feed it to these billboards and submit the information and be able to put it out there.
And how are the boards, and now that's coming to you from the boards through the T1 line setups?
Exactly. So that's
Okay.
the first step. It's coming into our office, goes into the election night reporting system, and is posted on our website.
And do can you guys send back to the board? Is it a two-way T1 line?
Well, it is because it updates the voter registration database,
Okay.
typically.
Okay.
But, I mean, on election night, I think we'll be concerned about the one-way flow of the information. So,
Okay.
yeah, thanks for that.
Yeah, but